the Chase Thomas Podcast, for people who have nothing but time to kill.
Which was a bunch of big-time regular season games that are probably going to be pretty close by and large.
This isn't the schedule I was waiting on. I was waiting on the 2025 schedule, that some of these good ones are at home, or more of these good ones are at home, I should say.
Okay. Well, 10.5, Matt Green. What say you about the Dogs here and that number going into this year? Are you taking the over or the under?
I'm absolutely hammering the over, sir. Ooh. Are you kidding me? This team, Georgia,
we disagree right out of the gate here.
Georgia has not lost 2 regular season games, or I guess I should say Georgia has lost 2 regular season games one time in the last 7 years. And it was the COVID year. Like, the COVID year, I mean, you basically throw that out for everybody, right? Like, whatever. It was a disappointing season. I forget how many games they played because one of them got canceled, but it was like 9-2 or something, 8-2, a 2-loss regular season. I mean, 10. Did they play 10 that year?
I think so.
I know the Vanderbilt game, like, they forfeited or something like that. I don't know. It was a weird thing, but Georgia, obviously the schedule is tough. You go at Alabama, you go at Texas, you go at Ole Miss, but I mean, all those teams also have to play Georgia, and Georgia's a really good team right now. And like, obviously the weakness a year ago, you would have to say, was the run defense. You know, it's the worst year since 2018, the only other year under Kirby Smart where they gave up over 100 yards on the ground. So you got to think that gets improved. If it doesn't, you know, we could be looking at another Georgia team that doesn't win the national championship. But I mean, even with those flaws, there's a lot of people that think, you know, Georgia was still the best team in the country a year ago. So that cleaning up the run defense is a matter of, like, can Georgia win a national championship, or can they be the best Georgia team yet? So I think it's really, they're still a contender regardless of, you know, if they have an elite run defense like they did in 2021 and 2022. But that's ultimately, like, the only real weakness I see on Georgia's team going into 2024.
Interesting. The first thing I want to throw out about this: are they going to be the first team to sit starters in regular season SEC games? Is Georgia going to be the one who becomes enemy number one? I'm curious how the Dogs fan base reacts. Like, I want to know in the Green household, when you're explaining to your mom and dad, when you're watching the Vanderbilt game, and it's announced like Carson Beck is going to play the first series and then he's out. Like, they're just going to bet that Gunner and company can hold this together. And that they're going to start saying,
I mean, that's not even that different. What 2021?
Well, I'm not even saying I'm saying like one game. I'm talking about one series. I'm saying like they're going to be. I think this is year one of
Vanderbilt
load management.
Might be the exception there.
I think there's going to be load management with Georgia, and I think it's going to be a storyline this year that Georgia is the first one that gets attached to it. That they're playing the long game. And they're going to sit guys in important spots, or maybe not even just important, but in games that they would not have sat guys in before, because you just had a 14 playoff and every game just still felt huge. That I think there's going to be some load management stuff that pops up with Georgia. Do you agree or disagree that Georgia is going to be, they're going to be the team that's under the microscope here?
That's a hard disagree for me personally. Like, I think of all the coaches to do something like that, Kirby Smart seems like the last one. Like, he's just the ultimate motivator, just like approach every single game the same way. You start getting into like, hey, you know, this game isn't that important. You know, you might be playing by the second quarter. Like, that's I feel like when you get upset and you just don't come ready to play. Like, you have to approach every game like maybe you take Carson Beck out midway through the second quarter if you're beating Vanderbilt 35-0 or something. Like sure. Like, I mean, that happened in 2021. They were up like 28-0. I think JT Daniels came out at the end of the first quarter. So, I mean, in a game like Vanderbilt, like all bets are off. But
I think they might not start him, is what I'm saying. Like Mississippi State in that spot. Like, I think guys might not start. I think they might just hold guys out, and it's like a bye week for them. It's like an additional bye week. But how do you justify
that to your team? That like,
I'm saying that's why
you're going to play. This game isn't important, so he's not going to play, but you still have to play.
That's what I'm saying.
Same thing watching the Hall of Fame game with the Bears and whoever. It's like, hey, you know, Caleb Williams isn't going to play in this game. We're a little worried about the turf and stuff. It's like, so these other 50 guys can play. Like, who gives a shit about them? Like, but our shiny first round pick, he's not going to play.
Here's a good over-under. Carson Beck sits out one of over-under. He just doesn't dress for Mississippi State, UMass, or Georgia Tech. Over-under 1.5, or even half that he just doesn't dress.
I think Carson Beck sits out 0 games if he's healthy. Like I just don't think that's a thing. And also like Georgia's schedule is pretty tough this year, like start to finish. Like,
well, how about this? What if you're 11-1? What if you're
October,
11-1 going into the Tech game? Like if you lose if you lose that game, you're still in the SEC title game, whatever. Like it's a rivalry game, and everyone's like, "Oh, you got to play," and it means some. Like, what if Georgia sat all their guys for the Tech game because they're like, who cares? We're still in the SEC title game and we're going to the playoff no matter what. That's in play.
You just don't know about good, clean, old-fashioned hate.
I'm telling you, that's in play. In the modern college football playoff, like you can't get Carson hurt in that game. If you're already clinched like a playoff berth, basically, you can't play.
You can't be losing games. Like, yeah, you might have some load management and like terms of like guys sitting more fourth quarters and stuff than you would normally do, but like the game's on the line. You can't be. No one's gonna be.
You hate this. You hate that I've thrown this in your wheelhouse. I'm telling you.
Why it would be specific to Georgia.
I didn't say it was gonna be specific to Georgia. I think they're the team that gets attached to because I could see Kirby being ahead of the curve here because I think Saban, if he was still around, he would take advantage of it. I think Harbaugh would do it. Like I think a lot of the best coaches will. I mean, Tennessee's going to rotate. Tennessee is going to be careful.
To be fair, that might be what Kirby Smart is already ahead of the curve on, is just playing so many guys. Because, I mean, you look at people love to talk about how Georgia hadn't had a 1,000-yard receiver since 2002. You know, it's like, but not many people talk about like 5-6 guys getting 30 catches on a season. You know, it's like they do spread it around a lot in general. And I remember one thing when James Cook was coming out of high school, like that was one thing his mom was keying on was the fact that Georgia had Zamir White committed in that class, that Georgia was going to be the kind of team that didn't just run the running back into the ground while he was in college. They basically were just trying to kind of save him for the NFL. And obviously you look at James Cook, his NFL season was better than anything he ever did in college, just in terms of production, not saying he wasn't good in college. But I think Kirby Smart could already be ahead of the curve in terms of kind of spreading the wealth like that and getting a lot of guys playing time and, you know, maybe keeping guys happy, like you're saying. But I don't think you're ever at any point saying like this game isn't that important, so we're going to put in a lesser player. Like I don't think that's ever going to be the case, especially not someone like Kirby Smart who just like seems to so just systematically approach every single week. Like that's what Nick Saban did. Like that's like if there's any calling card of the Alabama dynasty, it's bringing their A game every single week. And I don't think you can do that if you're worried about load management.
I think it's coming to the SEC and the Big Ten, but we shall see. I think
where it's likely to happen, I think, is like the Michigan-Ohio State game. If they're 11-0 and 10-1 going into that game and they're already going to play the next week, I think you're definitely going to see something like there. Like maybe you don't show everything, but I don't know. You can't just be benching people for the in-state rivalry. Like I don't know. I don't see it. I'm
going to make the prediction. I'm going to say if Georgia is 11-1 or better going into the Georgia Tech game, Carson Beck does not play in the Georgia Tech game. That's my prediction.
I would bet you a lot of money if he is healthy that he will start that game.
This will be fun to revisit.
If I were a betting man.
This will be fun to revisit. Bama feels like the most logical loss to me. If I had to pick one that's most likely, Georgia does not have a lot of success playing in Tuscaloosa. A lot of teams don't have a lot. I understand it's a little bit different going into Tuscaloosa now with Kalen DeBoer. To me, that one feels like the most difficult and most likely for the Dogs to go down. I think Texas, especially going down multiple backs, I think Texas is the one that people are going to circle, but I think Georgia's going to win at Texas. I think Georgia's going to beat Ole Miss. UT at home, we'll see how Tennessee season's going at that point. I still probably would lean Georgia there. Florida is always going to be weird in a neutral site in October. I don't really know, but the thing about this schedule too that I think's interesting, and this is why I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, I'm still going 10-2. I think Georgia goes 10-2 and makes the playoff. I think they lose to Bama, and then I think they lose one of at Ole Miss, at Texas, Tennessee at home, Florida, in a neutral site. They play all those games in mid-October to mid-November. I don't trust the receivers. I think losing Ra is a sneaky important thing for them. I don't love. I think what's going to be really interesting is I like their running back room a lot. I think Georgia fans are going to be happy with the running backs, whether it's the Robinsons, Nathaniel Frazier, whether that's obviously with Trevor Etienne. Like, I think they're stacked there. I think the defensive line's going to be good. I think they're going to be good in the secondary. But I think the schedule is just arduous. I think it's set up for them to drop 2 games. And it's going to surprise some Georgia fans that they drop 2 here. But I think they still end up in the SEC title game. Could see them still win the conference. I think they're as close to a playoff lock as it gets. They were number 1 in third down conversions a season ago. What if that goes down a little bit? They were first in long scrimmage plays a season ago. What if they come back down there? They only can go back down a little bit in terms of this offense. And I think they have less firepower than they did a season ago. I think losing Ladd and Brock are going to be hard to replicate. I think Oscar Delp is a good player, but he's not going to be Brock Bowers. I think Arian Smith needs to have a big year. I think they need someone to pop and replace that production with Ladd McConkey. I don't know. They have some guys who could be that. It's just unknown. I don't think Dylan Bell has like superstar potential. I think he could be solid. Colby Young could be solid. We'll see. I don't know. I think there's just a lot of.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think Dominic Lovett is really the only surefire receiver at Georgia right now that you can go ahead and pencil in is going to be a dude this fall and should be really, really good with Carson Beck. Everyone else, I think, is a question mark in that receiver room in terms of what they'll actually do production-wise. I think Georgia's going to be okay. I just think they're going to go through growing pains. I think it's going to take some time for Carson to get comfortable with this receivers. I think it's going to take some time for him to get comfortable with the new tight ends. I think they're going to lean on the run game a lot early because I think they're just loaded there with the Robinsons and Etienne and Frazier. So I don't know. I'm very curious how it unfolds, but that's my gut. Is I'm taking the under 10-2, and I think they lose at Bama is the one I would say is the most likely lock, and then they lose one of those 4 that I said there. So do you? I obviously you disagree, but is that a fair take to have here, Matt Green?
I would say Dylan Bell in that receiving group is probably the one I think has the most like star potential. But I think you've seen a lot of Georgia receiving groups that are just like a 4 or 5 like really solid guys, and that's all you really need. Obviously, Bowers and McConkey, you had a couple stars there. But I mean, returning the quarterback, like I think most people kind of question after Todd Monken left, like, oh, Georgia's offense is only going to have to go down from there, and Georgia's offense, I would argue, was better in 2023 than it was in 2022 under Mike Bobo. So you look at the schedule, and I will have to say, just to fact check, Georgia played in Tuscaloosa 3 times in the 21st century, and they're 2-1. And that's all I'll say.
Hold on, are we counting the COVID year?
Had some success in Tuscaloosa.
Are we counting the COVID year?
Yeah, that's the only time Georgia lost.
Oh, is it? Okay,
that's the only one they lost.
It helps my argument, so we'll keep that one. And then what were the other 2? No, when were the other 2?
2002 and 2007.
That's what I thought. Okay, so one of those was not Saban, and the other one was that even?
It was year 1 of Saban. Yeah,
that doesn't count either. Toss it out. So they're 0-1.
That was Mark Richt, and that was the year Alabama was on suspension, so they couldn't play in the SEC championship.
Yeah, toss them out. Toss them.
But they went like 9-3. They were like a good team in 2002.
Toss them. And what were they in the title games? What is the? Hold on, we're looking as a whole. Georgia has not.
Pat Dye lost. Said like Georgia wasn't. I think Pat Dye said Georgia wasn't man enough.
You lost. You were the better team and lost to. You lost to Bama. Why are you still confident? Bama has still quietly owned Georgia. Like, no,
I was simply just saying. You said Georgia doesn't have success going to Tuscaloosa.
Well, I should have said Georgia doesn't really have success against Alabama. Is what I would say.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not gonna dispute that, but I had to dispute the Tuscaloosa line. I think it was Pat Dye back in like 2002 said that like Georgia wasn't man enough to go into Tuscaloosa and win. And so that was like the cap, like the headline after that week, that man enough, that whole thing. But it was also supposedly tongue in cheek, like Pat Dye said it to try to amp Georgia up. Obviously, Pat Dye. Wait, am I confusing? Pat Dye was a UGA grad, right? Am I confusing it?
Pat Dye, you're talking about the legendary Auburn Pat Dye?
Yeah, he was a UGA grad. And then Vince Dooley was an Auburn grad. That's kind of what went to like Georgia and Auburn rivalry was friendly for a long time.
You went to UJ, yeah.
Great
all-time record, man.
I digress. So I just had to fact check that one point. So obviously Alabama, Georgia has not had a lot of success against Alabama in recent years. I just feel like Georgia knows Alabama and they don't know Texas. And I think with some inexperience in the secondary, like if I'm pointing to one regular season loss, like Texas just feels like the one that Georgia loses. If I have to like what was the Missouri or not Missouri? What was the Ole Miss score last year? Like 50 something? Like Georgia put up a 50 spot on Ole Miss, right?
Yeah, but I mean, they're going to Ole Miss. I think Ole Miss is better.
Of course, but it's like, is Georgia that much worse? They put a 50 spot on them. Like that game was like barely competitive after the.
I'm not saying, and again, I'm not predicting Ole Miss. I am saying that's just a brutal month-long stretch. Like Florida, we'll see what they look like, but it's the world's largest outdoor cocktail player. It's a rivalry game. We'll see what that looks like. Tennessee at home, we'll see where Tennessee's at. Like, is Tennessee undefeated at that point? Are they having another 2022 season? Are they rolling? What does Nico look like? That's going to be interesting to look at. And the other one is at Texas. So we'll see.
It's definitely a tough schedule. I just look at with what Georgia did to Tennessee and Ole Miss a year ago. Like,
very
those
different
teams
situations
could be better, but
too.
it's hard to be that worried when it was just such domination in both of those games.
Well, we disagree right out of the gate here. I'm curious on the Vols aspect of this. 9.5, Matt Green, or 8.5, excuse me, because I'm just going to go ahead and say,
yeah, I got 8.5 here.
Yeah, it's the lock of the season out.
Nicely done, nephew. The Chase Thomas podcast. Hell yeah.